The first thing personally that I wanted to take care of was winning the Deep South Conference, because I think if we didn't win the conference, then the national conversation doesn't happen. So to me, the conference was, we had to take care of that. We had to take care of the conference play, and that was going to allow us to then have a conversation, of national championship. And not that the national championship, probably wasn't the ultimate goal, but I knew there were some steps that had to take place in order for us to, one, make the NCAA tournament. And again, I felt like capturing the Deep South Conference tournament was one of the main steps in terms of getting into the NCAA tournament, and then, trying to win a semifinal game, and then making our way up to Rutgers and competing for the national championship. St. Andrews was a really talented team that year. I remember they had a couple Division I transfers. They were well coached. And we went, so the first time we played them that year, we were playing at St. Andrews, and our bus didn't show up on Saturday morning. And this is 20 years ago. While there was technology, it's certainly not like it is today. And I'm trying to track down the owner of the bus company. Long story short, we show up to St. Andrews about 20 or 25 minutes before the game starts. We would normally show up about 2 hours before the game. So we are literally changing on the bus as we're going down the road towards Laurinburg. And we did not get any extra time to warm up. We basically got there in 20 minutes, went from walking off the bus to getting a quick stretch and playing. And we ended up winning the game, and that was partially because we had such great senior leadership in our captains, and Nick Carlson and Jeff Viskovich and Matt Malloy. They were such mentally tough student athletes that I think we were probably able to endure a lot that year because of those three. So we ended up winning the game, but when we played them in the playoffs, I still have a vivid memory of this. I think we were down at one stretch in the first half, and I was probably a little bit louder in my late 20s than I am now in my late 40s. But I specifically remember calling a timeout and politely saying to the guys, if we didn't get this going, it was over today. And it was like a light switch went on, and we went on a tear and ended up, getting the win that day against a really tough team. And as you know, your life is in athletics. To beat someone 3 times in a year, particularly someone that's good, is not an easy task. But again, to me, it goes a lot. It goes back to our captains, and I've been doing this a long time now. And I can remember a day where Nick and Jeff and Matt came into my office, and I thought we were pushing them pretty good at practice. And I remember the 3 of them coming in. They're like, "Hey, Coach, can we talk to you for a minute?" I said, "Sure." And Nick said, "You need to push us harder." So I said, "All right, if you guys want to be pushed harder, we'll push you harder." But I just don't think that's something that's normal for college athletes to say, and for those captains to recognize that, having the big picture in mind. That's a moment in my coaching career that I'll probably never forget. But I'm thankful to this day that, Nick, Jeff, and Matt came into my office and, had the courage to have that conversation with me. And I appreciate that. So definitely not an easy task to beat St. Andrews 3 times. But I think it sharpened us going into the finals to really have to grind through a semifinal game. Now, if we're talking on May 26th, 2022, the game took place on May 26th, 2002. So today is the 20th anniversary. The first thing I remember from that day, it was hot in Piscataway. and they had us change. NCAA had us change in a separate building, and at the stadium they had a small little room. They may have had a bathroom in there, but there were no showers or anything, so it wasn't like we showed up. That was our location the whole day. We changed at one location, we drove over to the field, and then after the game we had to drive over to their stadium to take showers and get cleaned up. So I remember pulling into the stadium, and there were about 55 minutes before the game. I remember seeing that on the clock, and New York Tech was already on the field warming up. And I didn't really think much about it at the time. This was more of a reflection point. And we kind of went out late for a shorter warm up. So they were out in that heat for about 30 minutes longer than we were. And again, did we win the game because of that? Probably not. But I think, it might have been a little piece of the puzzle that day that maybe gave us a little bit of an edge where we weren't out in that heat for as long as they were. That's one of the first things I remember. The second thing was I never liked watching Matt Malloy get warmed up because Chris Campbell was shooting, and Chris was such a talented player that, he might score some on Matt in warm-ups, and that didn't mean Matt wasn't ready or Matt wasn't going to have a great game. It just kind of stressed me out as a coach. I never watched the goalie warm-up by design. But I remember after the goalie warm-up that day, Chris came over to the bench, and I would always ask him, I said, "Hey, how's Matt looking?" And he looked at me, he goes, "He's on," which gave me a good feeling, when the game started, and Matt was on, and Matt was on all day. He really was. That was about as good of a goalie performance as I've seen in 26 years of coach. I mean, he was really lights out. And we had a really good defense that year, but they were still, when you're playing the number one team in the country that is undefeated going into the national championship game, your goalie's got to make some plays, and your goalie's probably got to help you sometimes when there's a breakdown defensively, and Matt did that and more. So, the other thing that I thought was really important is Nick Carlson was a really special player, and won just about every award you could win in Division II during his career. Conference Player of the Year, National Player of the Year, Tackman of the Year, 3-time All-American. Nick was a true privilege to coach, and gosh, when I look back on my first head coaching job at age 27, and I was lucky enough to have Nick Carlson on the roster, that's a pretty big deal. It was very obvious to us early in the game that New York Tech's defensive strategy was to shut down Nick, and I think they felt like if they shut down Nick, they could probably win the game. But we knew Nick's two line mates on attack, Devin Spilker and Jason Randolph, were also excellent players. And I thought Nick was really so instrumental that day. He scored a goal, but if I remember correctly, I'm not sure he scored twice. I think he may have scored once. But what Nick did was Nick did not force the issue. I think Nick realized he was such a smart player. Nick realized that he was the focus. And what Nick did was focus on getting the ball to his teammates in good spots where they could be successful. So I think, here you are, senior year, last collegiate game you're going to play. You're the biggest focus for the other team defensively, and the fact that he didn't force the issue, to make sure he got his points. He played team lacrosse, got his teammates involved, shared the ball with them. I just think it tells you a lot about Nick. He was completely selfless that day, and sure enough, Jason Randolph had a great day. Devin Spilker gets MVP of the title game. I remember that very clearly. So I think that was a big piece of the equation that day. I think our close defense was probably a little bit underestimated. We started 2 sophomores that year, and then we had Travis Gillespie, who was a multiple-time All-American, and was kind of anchoring the defense down low as a senior. And but Nick Kovakoff and Clint Pitts as sophomores played terrific in that game. And Nick ended up being an all-conference defenseman for us, was terrific. I think Clint Pitts 2 years later ended up being the Division II Player of the Year. So these are some guys that maybe were a little bit under the radar at that point. We knew they were super talented, but on a national level, I don't know if everybody else knew about them at that point. So, and then our midfielders were just tough as nails that day. I think about Brad Bauer all the time, and playing on a bad back, and we were kind of running 5 midfielders that game, and just that group really held the fort for us in the middle of the field that day. So it was a team effort from end to end, but again, I think Nick playing completely selfless and getting the ball to the other guys, and Nat Malloy just being on fire in the goal were, to me, were some of the keys that day for us to be successful.